Hey guys, welcome to SheKnowsArsenal. My name is Jessica. I'm your host. You can follow me on Twitter at JustinoTweets and at SheKnowsArsenal. So the jet lag is hitting me, you guys. I can't lie. Like at this, like right now, I feel very like I don't know where I am. I don't know what I'm doing. Everything is just like I'm almost having like an outer body experience. It's crazy. Like the last 2 days have been pretty difficult in terms of like just getting used to things and yeah, so the first 3 days, obviously, because you're running on, like, adrenaline, it's fine. Last 3 days, my body has been like, "Where are you and what are you doing?" And I haven't been able to give it an answer, you know? So, there you go, but the most consistent thing and the thing that makes me feel most at home is talking to you guys about the Arsenal. So, today should be a really good show, obviously, because a lot of us have probably watched the first 3 episodes of All or Nothing. And so we can kind of chat a little bit about that and what we kind of thought about those first 3 episodes, and then also do a preview for an Arsenal's game against Crystal Palace at Selhurst Park tomorrow. So make sure you guys like the video and subscribe to the channel. See what you guys are saying. Eagle Eyed Football says, "Afternoon, Jess. Honestly, I'm nervous. I'll take a draw against you." I mean, I feel like it's nice to feel like teams, like the fans of teams that we're about to play, are nervous about playing us, but, like, at the same time, I'm just like, I can't even get gas because I just have, like, especially after watching All or Nothing, and I know that the circumstances were quite different, but you can feel like you're gonna beat a team and it doesn't happen, so but I'm glad that you at least feel scared based on what you've seen. Tony Smith says, "Are you going to the match, Jess?" No, I won't, but I'll be on the terrace tomorrow. We'll be doing a studio show tomorrow to talk about the game, so you can catch me on there. I'll also post a match review on here as soon as the game ends. Lynn says, "Good afternoon, Jess. Good afternoon to you as well." Let's see. Amira says, "Hey, Jess in chat. Hope everyone's had a great day so far." Yeah, like, I've had actually a good day, even though I've been kind of like, "Where am I? Like, what's going on?" I've had a good day, slept in quite late because we had the live football terrace show last night. We didn't get in until, like, 2 o'clock in the morning. It was insane, and then slept in until, like, about 10 or so, maybe no, it was probably 11, and then now, after watching All or Nothing, I'm here talking to you guys. So, yeah. Matt G says, "Hey, Jess in chat." Hello to you as well. Tony says, "Rubbing my hands together. Let's have a great fucking pod." Exactly. So, nothing, I mean, I'm here to bring you guys like the energy and my thoughts and all that kind of stuff, but the show is never the same without you guys giving me your thoughts and feelings in the chat. So make sure you guys are active and letting me know what you think. But I do want to start off with All or Nothing and some original some kind of opening thoughts on those first 3 episodes and what kind of stood out to me. Um I'm also on Sunday evening, Souls, George, and Harry will all be on the show, and we're gonna actually be doing a narratives that have been debunked on All or Nothing. I think that's probably been the most um interesting part of the documentary is seeing certain things happening that we all have big opinions on, but don't have enough information maybe to be making those coming to those conclusions. One of the things that kinda stood out to me was the the fact that Thierry Henry was even involved in it, and you're probably like, "Well, duh, Jess, like, he's, Arsenal legend, blah, blah, blah." But based on the narrative, especially on Arsenal Twitter, um, that Thierry Henry hates Arteta and hates Arsenal for some reason, he did not come off like that at all, and so I think there's gonna be many opportunities to kinda reevaluate some of these narratives that we have based on very little information, and I get some people will say, "It's PR, it's this and that." There's some parts of this that you just can't zhuzh up to make it sound like anything different, so I do think we're gonna have a longer conversation about that and kind of the things that we've learned about the players and Mikel Arteta, which is I think the best part about a documentary is we all know how it's going to end. It's going to end in tears, but we get to learn more about the players that we watch day in and day out, which is great. So uh, one of the things that you know, I I thought about a lot when I was watching those first 3 episodes was the inconsistencies that we had before Southampton. The inconsistencies that we had before Southampton, because for me, that's the game that we started to see the Arsenal that we know now. That was the first game of last season, that Southampton game at home where we beat them 3-0 after the Everton game where we started to look like we knew what we were doing. There was pieces of it, against, Norwich. There was pieces of it, against Newcastle early on in that season, but ultimately because of how we started off with the 3-game loss and not being able to score any goals, and then going into that weird period where we lost to Manchester United and Everton away, there was just a lot of inconsistencies, and I was trying to think of what could have contributed to those inconsistencies so early on in the season and how they mirrored some of the things that we saw at the back end of the season. And so I think having a bad preseason definitely hurt us a lot. We had a very bad preseason last preseason. We didn't win a game. Um, we just didn't look like a team that was ready to go. We lost to Spurs, we lost to Chelsea, we drew to Hibs, and I think that bad kind of, like, not having that continuity, that really did contribute to us starting off pretty slowly because we really didn't click into gear until December through March, we were really, really good. Obviously, that's not enough throughout a season. Like, you need to be way more consistent than that. And we just kind of saw like there was just so much inconsistencies, and it started from that preseason. Um, those key transfers coming in late, I don't think that helped us either. Ramsdale, Tomiyasu, Odegaard, none of them played against Brentford. I think Ben White did, Lokonga did as well, and Nuno was there. But the three kind of like main starters, besides, yeah, White, Ramsdale, none of those three, Ramsdale, Tomiyasu, and Odegaard, not having those. I mean, those are guys that start for us. So, um, not having those transfers done, I think, did hurt us quite a bit as well. We started off the season with, like, Pablo Marie starting. That wasn't great, so it was the transfers and then having players out due to COVID. I think Gabriel had an injury, Thomas Partey suffered an injury against Chelsea in preseason, so not only did we have transfers coming in late that I mean, I get that you can't get everything done before the season starts, but you wanna get the most important players done during before the season starts. Having that and also having injuries to key players again at the start of the season did not help. Kieran Tierney, he had his injury issues early on in the season. Thomas Partey, like these are key players to our squad. So yeah, that really didn't help. And I think what really stood out to me the most is players not knowing how to don't know how to react to difficult situations. I still believe that regardless to who we had available, we had enough to beat Brentford on that day away from home. I don't think there was anything that I saw. I get that Lacazette wasn't available, Gabriel, Aubameyang. We didn't have some of the players that are really important to the team, but I didn't necessarily see such a broken down team that we couldn't have at least drawn the game, and there's going to be games like this season where we're going to go to difficult away grounds where their fans are going to be up for it and we're not going to have all of our starters available. And this is where mentality is really going to click into gear, and one of I think more than anything, improving the technical level of the squad, improving the depth of the squad, the mentality of the squad also has to improve. There's been a lot of talk around, does Arsenal have what it takes in difficult moments? I do think Gabriel Jesus and Zinchenko are gonna help that because they've played for teams that have really been able to sustain that consistency throughout ups and downs in a long season and in difficult moments. But it's also about the players that have been here for a while that have kind of went through a couple of seasons learning how to build up that mentality. It just doesn't come out of nowhere. You really have to work on it. And so as a team, mentally, a couple of injuries cannot destroy our season. And early on in the season, not having key members to the squad available and in the latter stages of the season against Newcastle, Spurs, and more importantly, I really do think against Southampton, Brighton, and Southampton and Brighton, I'll say. Um, Not having that mentality just kind of torpedoed our season. And all we had to do was win one more game. And I think we think so differently about a lot of the things that we're doing. So that really stood out to me. And I was thinking, obviously on the day before the start of the season, do I feel like we've had a better preseason? Yes. Do I feel like we've gotten the most important transfers through the door before the season starts? Yes. But going away to Selhurst Park, a place that we don't do well at, against a team that we don't match up well against, I think this will be a really good test to see if that mentality has really changed. Because if you think that, Crystal Palace are going to go out there and just fold up, they're not going to. And so this is going to be a key test to see if we have actually changed. Let's see what you guys are saying. Talked a lot there. Blah, 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 blah. Lynn says, I also like that Mikel wasn't afraid to open up on his personal life. So for me, those players know he will have empathy for them that may be suffering. Yeah, I mean, I do think one of the biggest things that we saw in uh in the All or Nothing, like in those first 3 episodes, is how Arteta really tries to tap into this psychological aspects of what the players are going through. And what we've learned is that some of our players have went through quite a bit. Kieran Tierney spoke out about kind of like his mental health issues. Obviously, Ramsdale talked about the abuse that he suffered after signing for Arsenal, and Nuno Tavares was really struggling early on in the season. And so Mikel and his team have tried to do quite a bit to try to like get those players back on track. And so I do think Mikel understands that you have to care about the player holistically and not just about what they can do on the pitch for you. Let's see. Anike says, Hey, Jess, watching All or Nothing shows me how far we've come. I boycotted the first 5 games of the season because I hated Arteta that much. Now I think he's the best young manager in the league. Wild. Yeah. I mean, when you look at you remember so much. Like, we all know that any game that you've watched, if you see little clips of it, it kind of comes rushing back to you. And I remember watching the Norwich game and thinking, because Tomiyasu was in there, Odegaard was in there, we had Ramsdale in there, that we were doing it. I was like, oh, we look good, we look good. We look way better than we did then. Yeah, we were still crap against Norwich. So, yeah, we have come a long way. And I think that's a testament to what Arteta has built, and we'll definitely get a chance to see whether or not it holds up in those difficult away matches. Um, let's see. Orange says, "What did you think of the speakers before the Liverpool game?" I tweeted about this. I said that I felt as though, I didn't really understand it in terms of I understood what he was trying to accomplish, but I didn't actually feel like the way that he executed it would actually have any benefit, and ultimately it didn't. I don't think you can replicate that feeling at Anfield with 2 speakers. I really don't, and I think, um, it was something that he tried, and he said that that's something that he tried, one of his crazy ideas, and it ultimately didn't work. And so, um I thought, "Good idea, bad execution, throw it away in the bin, don't do it again." But, I know that it's one of those things that has gotten a lot of criticism slash has been, a banter type of thing for rivals to hook on to. But when you look at it, I do feel like when it's not your club and you don't have a good view of what your club is doing behind the scenes, you'd probably be surprised at what wacky things other managers have tried. Your own manager has tried to try to get the game over the line. And, I can't really fault Arteta for trying new things. He's a new manager and he's trying to figure out different ways to prepare his team for difficult moments. And so it didn't work out. But I did see people also trying to banter Seth MacFarlane, the team photographer, his speech before the North London Derby. And I'm like, where you can probably, look at what he did before Liverpool as somewhat of a failure, to try to banter Arsenal for having their team photographer that's been around for a long time slash fan really trying to G up the team before a really important North London derby, which we ultimately played them off of the park and won the game. I do find it to just be like, okay, so basically what they're gonna do is try to make every single thing that's in that's done in this documentary to look like it's just cluelessness. I've seen so much really bad narrative driven by that. And what it really comes down to is had we had won one more game this season, everything in this documentary would be looked at as smart, innovative, fresh new coach, getting a young team across the line. 2 points, is really the difference between Arteta being looked at as a genius or a total failure. So I don't really think about it that deeply because I know that those are the margins. Had we had finished in the top 4, the narrative around this would have been totally different. He would have been the genius, instead of this just cone man, so it just is what it is, right? So something else that really did stand out to me, you know, in the documentary, in these first kind of 3 episodes was the feeling around KT versus Nuno, and KT's injury kind of being an opening for Nuno to kind of show what he can do early on in the season, probably a little bit too early, and how his confidence was really ripped from him in those first couple of games. He did well kind of in the beginning, and then once we got to Liverpool, he made those mistakes. Arteta and the team had to really discuss, whether or not he could go again, if he had what it took to turn it around and kind of put those mistakes behind him. And Kieran Tierney and Nuno kind of talking about each other and how they were each other's competition and how Kieran Tierney had never felt that since he's been at Arsenal, I think was really interesting because we need more of that. And even though Nuno kind of ended up not being particularly competitive against Kieran Tierney towards the end, it was just more Kieran Tierney wasn't available and Nuno was there. But it didn't really end up being kind of like that battle that we probably initially thought. I do see Kieran Tierney having a lot more competition for his position now that Zinchenko is here, and just being able to see that they actually do think about these things and talk about, it's me versus him, and we want to beat each other out for a spot. That there is a competitiveness in the squad once somebody is there, and we need more of that in our team. We haven't really had that, and I kinda liked hearing them talk about it. Um, Tony says Tavares and Lakanga haven't really worked out. Well, they're young players that weren't even supposed to be playing. That's what the documentary said. We all kind of knew that Nuno and Sambi were meant to be young players that weren't supposed to play as much as they did. So it's kind of premature for me to say that two 21-year-olds haven't really worked out when they've only been at Arsenal for 1 season and ultimately played a lot more than what they were supposed to. So in terms of, yeah, were they able to deputize for KT and Thomas Partey well? Probably not. But are they bad players that we're gonna sell because they haven't worked out because they're just terrible? Absolutely not. Nuno is gonna go to Marseille and he's gonna absolutely smash it. And now that Sambi is playing in the 8 role and not being made to no players even like, let's keep it real. There's probably not a lot of players in this league that can play the Thomas Partey role. It's too difficult. It's a two-man job. So to task a 21-year-old with it and then to write him off as some sort of failure doesn't really sit well with me. So I get where they haven't worked out, kind of feels like the right conclusion to come to, but they're 21 and I expect them to still be really good players. Like it's just outsiders are always gonna look at it as those players are crap, but if those 2 players were in their teams, I think they would have a little bit more sympathy for the situations that they were in and not just remove context because that's how you come up with a narrative like those players haven't worked out. Orange says, "To be honest, I think it's good that all the clubs are hating and speaking on us so much. We have to be doing something right. We been a while since we have a chip on our shoulder." Dev M says Twitter fans don't know how to banter. Absolutely clueless. Pap says Arteta is doing everything off the pitch exceptional. My thing is on the field time management rotation for the season is crucial. The bench needs minutes. Um, I think he like today spoke on the fact that they did rush players back, that the squad didn't have enough depth. Like that's essentially what he was saying. And so ultimately you're rushing back the likes of Kieran Tierney, Tomiyasu, and Thomas Partey, and it's backfiring on us a lot. So one of the keys to this season is definitely going to be rotation and utilizing the depth a lot better. Last season, we really went with a thin squad, a very 13-man squad. Beyond Emil Smith Rowe, there wasn't really a lot of faith in the other players coming off of the bench. But the season prior, when we were in Europa League, Arteta did rotate quite a bit, and we saw that the squad couldn't hold up that same level of quality as the starters. So I do think he'll rotate a lot more now that he has a bigger squad that he can count on. I think he has about 16 players now versus the 13-ish that we had last season, but 2 more players would definitely fill us out really good. I do think people have a misconception that even the best teams have, 25-man squad that they can really rely upon. It's probably closer to 16 players that they really count on. The rest are kind of like backup goalkeepers and kids. So if we could get to 16 to 18 players that Arteta can rely upon, then I think we're in a good position going into this season with more games. Um, so let's see. Dev M says our squad quality is a lot better now, barring a couple of positions. We are in good shape. Ultima says still worry about Partey depth player. Hopefully we get it. Um, Tony says, do you think we should also put Odegaard in the rush back group? Not for injury, but he plays all the Norway minutes, and we've seen he could use a rest right after international break. Yeah, I do think that you can maybe count Odegaard in that camp. He needs there needs to be a player there that can step into that role because there's some players that, they're single points of failure. If we don't have them, our system doesn't work. We haven't really created a plan B for them when they're not available. So you kind of have to have duplicates. I think if you don't have Thomas Partey in the team, you have to play with a double pivot instead of a single pivot. That does change the way that you play. And if you don't have Odegaard, you really don't have that link to Saka the way that you should. So having Vieira in there, I do think helps that because they do kind of play the same position. So yeah, I think we have kind of addressed that in that way. But maybe you could add Odegaard in there that maybe he does play quite a few minutes for Norway, and that doesn't help when you need him to play at a very high intensity, like a couple days after for Arsenal. Let's see what you guys saying. What you guys saying? Um, let's see. Tony says, "Do you think you could do with a bit more experience in the squad?" I find this to be like interesting that I feel like rivals or people from the outside are looking at the squad and not recognizing that there is some experience there, and we have pretty well. Like, we have addressed that this season or this transfer window. Um, Naturally, you get more experience by playing in big games and playing seasons and getting those minutes under your belt, but you have Thomas Partey, you have Granit Xhaka, they have quite a bit of experience, and whether you think that they're, a formidable duo or not, I think it's really hard to deny that when the 2 of them play together, they are one of the best, midfield pivots in the league. Like, it can't be disputed based on the amount of points per game that you get when the 2 of them are playing together. They have quite a bit of experience. They're both 30 years old, and they'll probably start the vast amount of games. Odegaard to me, is not really considered a young player. I think when you look at the team, it's more about the experience in that front line and getting players that know how to bring games over the end, like, to win in difficult moments, and when they get that one chance, they put it away. They've been in big games before, they know how to do it, they've been there and done that, and so adding Gabriel Jesus and Zinchenko does do that for us. So when people are like, "Experience," I think what they're thinking is like, you need to get more old players in your team, but we've had old players in our team, we've had an old squad, and they didn't have the experience necessary, so I think we've done quite a bit to kind of fill that out in the squad. And just because we have the youngest squad doesn't mean it doesn't have experience. I do think some Arsenal fans really placed a lot of emphasis on the young squad thing. Um, it was it was true, but it was also something that I think we went overboard with. Ultimately, I think Saka should have a lot more experience this season. Martinelli should have a lot more experience. Martin Odegaard. That back line, I don't think it's too young to function. Gabriel, White, Zinchenko, those players to me have enough experience between them to make it work. So yeah, I do think we have experience, but I don't necessarily feel like we need to bring in old players just to make it work. Um, that's just kinda where I'm in with it. Um, like Aubameyang and Lacazette, I mean, it's the right type of experience that you need, and I think that we did that. Let's see. Lynn says, "What do you think about us being in talks for Jared Bowen?" I didn't see anything about us being in talks for Jared Bowen. Um, if you guys can tell me about that, uh, get me to a tweet or something that says something about it. I could talk about it, but right now I'm kind of like, I don't really see that. So yeah, I think in terms of, the documentary, we can kinda stop there unless you guys wanna bring out or talk about something else that you guys noticed. I think we can kinda end it there because we are gonna do a longer, pod on this with other people as well. Roman says, "At this point, we can do no more, say players like Saka, ESR are inexperienced, though young." Um, yeah, I mean, it's more like those players than anything, but Gabriel Jesus to me is not inexperienced. I do think Saka has a good amount of experience. Like at this point, I would expect him to kind of take it to that next level. I just view him differently than Martinelli and ESR because he's been in and around the first team for longer than they have. Quite similarly to Martin Odegaard, we have to put more pressure on him to stand up in big games. He's somebody that he's been playing at the professional level since he was 16. So as much as I do wanna lean into the young player thing to give me kind of like that comfort blanket of, "Oh, they're young and inexperienced," but when I really look at the team and I'm like, "Do I really think Gabrielle's super inexperienced? No. Do I think White is really inexperienced? No." I can't rely upon that this season. I do think we have enough experience to do it. Um, Ishmael says, "Why does everybody discount the experience this young team has last season that is experience?" It is, and that's why when you look at some of the situations that we'll be in, we will be at a hostile away ground on the first game of the season again this season. So we've had that experience. Saka's had that experience. ESR, Martinelli, they all started that game. White, he started that game, so they have that experience already, as far as I'm concerned. And we will probably start with a much stronger squad than we did against Brentford. Was Brentford better than I thought that they would be? Yeah. But when we played them at home, we were infinitely better than them just because we were more prepared and probably because we had a little bit more experience with them. So I look at it and I'm just like, this is such a good moment to see how much we've improved in terms of our mentality. We know that the squad is technically better. We know that we have better players in the squad. But in terms of playing away at a hostile away ground when you know that all eyes are on you because you're the first game of the season opening up the Premier League season, we gotta get over this hump, and Saka, Martinelli, these players have that experience now. So for me, it's the inexperience thing, it's run out. I is for me, they have to perform, They have to perform. Jacob says Saka is experienced. He's been playing first team football for like 2, 3 years, in England international. I don't view him the same as I do as Martinelli and them, I think he's a little bit beyond that. We have to give him more respect, if we're always trying to compare him to the likes of Foden and everybody else. If we put him in that same category, every time we lose a game, we can't say, "But they're inexperienced." That's kind of where I'm at with that. Um, and I think if you ask Saka, "Do you want people to caveat everything that you guys do with your inexperience?" I feel like they would say no. I feel like they would say that they need to beat Crystal Palace tomorrow, and that they are experienced enough to get it over the line. A and B says this is a grown team now, and they did a lot of growing up over the course of last season. This includes Saliba, Arteta, and clearly Adu. And the thing about it as well is that, like, when you look at the players that are actually gonna be out there playing, they're not gonna be super inexperienced. They're not gonna be super young either. Again, our we have an experienced midfield 3 and Granit Xhaka, Thomas Partey, and Odegaard. So the players that are actually making our team a lot younger, I think, are players that are not going to play as much. So yeah, but ultimately I did enjoy those first 3 episodes, but what I will say is that it was kind of painful as well. Um, reliving those first 3 games was not great, and so we really need to just get that. I think if you beat Crystal Palace, you'll take some of that anxiety, at least off the fan base, in terms of, "Can we win the first game of the season?" Anike says, "If the squad resolves the mentality issue and we sign a center mid and a winger, do you think we could be dark horses for the title?" I think we'd be closer to dark horses for 3rd. Again, I've questioned whether or not, why people feel like 3rd is not in play and why they feel like Spurs have it locked off. That doesn't mean that I don't think they'll get it, but I think those all 2 there's 2 positions in the top 4 um, that are in play there. So I think if we get a Yuri Tielemans or something like that, we bring in a winger, whoever it is, um, and with the players that we brought in, I think we're dark horses for 3rd. I expect us to make top 4. We're good, like, we're good. And again, age is not always experience, you can have a team full of old players and not have great experience, not the right type of experience, and we always equate experience with age, and we also don't question the experience that older players have. I don't think Lacazette and Aubameyang have the right type of experience for Arsenal, or they didn't, because if you look at their careers, they didn't win much. They didn't win much, they weren't if you were to take Lacazette and Aubameyang's experience in its totality, and then you took Gabriel Jesus and Zinchenko's experience in its totality, you may have different age ranges, but I prefer the experience that Jesus and Zinchenko have over Lacazette and Aubameyang, because regardless of their age, I'd rather have Premier League winning experience in that locker room than maybe a Bundesliga, cup here, maybe a French something there. They played a lot longer, but they haven't really won much. You know what I mean? So I do think we attribute too much like experience to age, and we have to question the type of experience that we want in this side. I see enough experience there where we should be expecting to, you know, to be able to keep games, like, to be really competitive in games away from home against Liverpool and Manchester City. We should expect to get points from those games now. Maybe not win all of them, but not get 0. Do you know what I mean? Our record against the top 6 has got to get better. We have to be able to win games when it matters. We have to be able to win games when we don't have our best 11. That's what I mean. I'm not saying that this team has to win everything, but what I'm saying is some of the excuses that we had last season are not going to hold water this season, because I don't really think we're as inexperienced as we were last season. And we have the better type of experience now with the players that we brought in. There's 265 of you guys in here. Like the video and subscribe to the channel. Dev M says, thoughts on Josh Kroenke from the first 3 episodes. It's exactly what I expect him to be. A little bit, he's very American, if you know what I mean. Um, he's kinda corny, a little bit nerdy, but ultimately, wants to do as good as he possibly can, wants to support the club, and especially, like, Arteta and the board as much as possible, and I think he came off well. I do think that, it's a little bit too early to just say KSE are great owners, but what I will say is still since 2018, when they had 100% ownership, they have tried and they have invested. It's a myth that the Cronkies have not invested. Have we invested well? Not always, and that's because early on in Cronky's ownership, like, especially like since 2018, we've had the wrong people in charge. Emery was a bad signing, Raul was a bad signing. That whole thing was just bad. So they were kind of learning on the job, and they've made some mistakes, and there's been some bumps in the road. But ultimately, you can't fault Josh Kroenke for trying as much as possible. Like, I don't see somebody that's absent, but he's made mistakes, but he's also done some good, so I think he came off well. He came off very American, like, just it was wild to me. Tony says, "Do we have the best looking team in the PL? Everybody's team looks great with their shirt off." I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I can answer that question, but, yeah, that's up for you guys to decide, to be honest. Um, Tony says Jesus and Zinchenko more professional than Aubameyang and Lacazette. Yeah, it's it's I'm not saying Aubameyang and Lacazette don't have value, and I think when if you see Aubameyang and the Barcelona team, he's playing the role that he plays best, is when he's not tasked with being the leader. If he has tons of quality around him, he's gonna be just great. But with a young team that doesn't really have that same level of quality, and is also not playing in a league like, the Premier League is very, very competitive. It's one of those where you need something a little bit different, and I think we brought that in with the players that we bought. So that's kinda where I'm at with that. I know people don't like to hear negativity around Aubameyang or Lacazette. It's like, "Oh, why are you crapping on them? They're not here." All I'm saying is that I like the experience that we brought in. That's what I'm saying, and I do think if you task somebody like a Gabriel Jesus with kinda leading this team forward, he'll handle it a little bit better than Aubameyang, who just kinda wants to get his goal tally, and you can't really hate him for that because that's what strikers are meant to do, right? So, yeah, that's just where I'm at with that, but let's kinda talk about the game, tomorrow, because I can't lie, I am really nervous. I am really nervous just because of the scars of last season, and I know sometimes you have to update, and say, "We're not we've had a good season or a good preseason. We've gotten the signings in, they bedded in well. We're gonna have, our probably our best squad that we can probably put out there, our best team." But I can't help but just want to see the mentality change for myself because I think Crystal Palace is a mentality game. There's a reason why we go there and we don't win. We were talking about it yesterday at the Football Terrace live event, and you know, people were explaining to me that I'm somebody who's never been to Selhurst Park before, but the reason why it's an intimidating ground is because it's so close in. It's one of those old school stadiums, and it's different than the Emirates, and you don't feel like you're gonna have a good day out. The fans are right on top of you. It's a London derby, and Palace just tend to turn up against Arsenal. They are a bogey team for us, and it doesn't help now that you have Vieira there. He has them playing good football. They have great their recruitment has been excellent since he's been in, and they're a much younger, vibrant side, and they're such vibes. Like, I know people kind of think that Crystal Palace is just a power and pace team. They have power and pace, but they also have flair. And you have players like Elise, will be injured for this game, won't be able to play. But when you have Elise, you have Eze, you have Zaha, you have a team like that, and then you have a like kind of like a solid center back pairing back there of Anderson and Gahey, and they had a midfield that they felt like was very energetic. Um, they can really do damage to big teams, and that's what we saw last season. A lot of the big teams had a difficult time with Crystal Palace, especially at Selhurst Park. We saw even Man City at the end of the season, they really struggled against them. So Spurs struggled against them as well. So it's not going to be an easy game. It's really, really not. And so what we saw in preseason was a team that's prepared, ready to go, fit, and all that kind of stuff. So it's not going to be really about that. I do think on paper, player for player, we are way better than Crystal Palace. This is gonna be about what's up here. That's what this is gonna be about for me. 100%. So, just kinda talking about where Crystal Palace have been, um, they Vieira has said that they haven't had the best of preseasons. It hasn't been smooth, and so one of the quotes that he kinda put out there was, they did not have the best preparation in preseason, but the group has worked well this week. The squad was split for the tour of Singapore and Australia last month as some players did not meet the entry requirements. So, when I looked at some of the lineups that they put out there, like against Manchester United, um, and there was another game that they played, and I looked at that as well, is that I didn't necessarily see the team that I think we're gonna see tomorrow. I didn't see Gahey, who's not injured, so apparently he's somebody that maybe didn't get to play those games because of certain reasons, and so I would imagine you'd see instead of, whoever they had back there, you'd see Gahey and Anderson as a center back pairing. You might see, um, Mitchell on the left. You might see Nathaniel Klein on the right. I'm not sure about their midfield because I know that they signed Decore, not Decore from Everton, but Czech Decore. We were actually linked with him as well. It's a very good player. I'm not sure what he'll be like coming straight from the French league. You see some players step onto the pitch for day 1 and just feel like they've been there forever, and then you see players like, Boubakary Soumaré, who really, really struggled for Leicester, coming from France. So, it's a toss-up whether he'll play, and it's also a toss-up whether or not he will play really well, but ultimately, like, I feel like he might play a part in this game. The other 2 midfielders, I'm not quite sure who they will be. Maybe one of them will be Eze, we'll see. And then we know we'll probably see Zaha, no Olise, so maybe it'll be the kid that used to be at Arsenal's academy. I think his name is like Ebiowibi or something like that. Sorry if I'm butchering that, but you might see him out on the right, or maybe even Jordan Ayew, and then we'll probably see Mateta through the middle. So I don't think what they've been doing in preseason is probably not indicative of what we'll see on on tomorrow, but they are a physical, athletic, and good team. When they get you, they're on you, and they'll kinda sit back a little bit, try to hit you on the counterattack. They play much better football now under, Vieira, so I think this is gonna be a huge test. Now, um, talking about Arsenal and what kind of like Arteta said ahead of this game, we'll kinda go through some of the key points of the press conference. Um, he kinda talked about how different the game is to last season. He said, "Well, it's different. Obviously, everything that happened before the game was pretty strange and unique. The preparation, the preseason that we had, it was a different context. We are really excited, but we are, really looking forward to the new season. We will try to start in the best way possible, and this is how we focused our preparation." And so what I'm really looking for Arsenal, again, is the mentality. When it didn't matter, which is preseason, the results don't matter in preseason, we were excellent. But when we're in that packed stadium and people are yelling obscenities at our players and Zaha is trying to get past you and, it's they're being physical with you and you're not getting the calls and everybody's right on top of you, are you gonna be able to put out the same type of performances that you did against Sevilla and Chelsea? Or are you gonna capitulate? That's what I'm looking for. Um, that will show me whether or not there's a difference in now. Going back to the kinda like the key points, he says, the expectations on Jesus. When you bring in top players, they are coming from top clubs and they have been extremely successful over the years, they're going to expect that. The role that Gabby has here is going to be very different to the role Gabby had at his previous club. That needs some adaptation and some time. He's done fantastically well, and we're all surprised how quickly he's done it. But we have to share that responsibility, and he's an enormous talent. A player with a mentality that is so contagious, he is going to give us a lot, but with but it's a team contribution at the end of the day. So when you think about the last game against Crystal Palace and how it went, they had chances that they put away, but we also had chances in that game. When you if you watch that game with a clear eye view, we had chances. Emile Smith Rowe had a chance. I think Odegaard had a chance as well. There was chances there. And so away from home, my expectation of somebody like Gabriel Jesus is if it's difficult and Crystal Palace are on us and they're trying to kind of exert that home dominance upon us, when we get our chance to shut them up, we got to take it. And I would expect Gabriel Jesus to put that in the back of the net. Also, if we go down a goal, I think Gabriel Jesus could be the key to that as well. Getting us back on track, making sure that we have an outlet up top. You know, there was times when we had Lacazette and Aubameyang up top last season, especially away from home, that they just kind of got swallowed up by the occasion, and the center backs had a really easy day out. I would expect Gabriel Jesus to find solutions to keep us not in the game, but if Crystal Palace are kind of on top of us, to give us an outlet up top and make the day really difficult for their center backs. So that's a difference that I'm looking to really see. And I do think when you look at the team and they're looking Crystal Palace or whatever team it is, difficult away ground or whatever, and you look up top and you see somebody like Lacazette who doesn't have a lot of goals in them, and just kind of looks like they're out of sorts in a game like that. It does bring down the mood of the team, to feel like it's all is lost, especially if you're down a goal. But if you have somebody like a Gabby Jesus in your team and you can look up there and say, okay, we may be down, but we're not out. I do think that, the team will have um, a better feeling if things don't go to plan because in these games things don't always go to plan. You may give up an early goal, you may go up and then they equalize. You need to feel like you're always in the game and there's always a chance that you're going to win it. And I do think there were times last season where we went down a goal and then we very quickly went down one or two more because there wasn't that feeling that we could get back in it. Um let's see. Troy says, "I don't want Arteta to get comfortable. I want more players learn from the past. Our players are very injury prone. We are one injury away from a disaster. I want to see at least two more players." Um, I mean, that's not really up to Arteta, is it? When we say we don't want Arteta to get comfortable, that's on a do whether or not he's going to bring in new players. I don't think not bringing in two players more is Arteta saying, "I don't want any more. I'm comfortable." So he did speak on uh more players, and he said, "We are really active, as you can see, with incomings and outgoings. Everything is still open. It's a long window. A lot has happened. It's incredible how much business the club has done across the Premier League, how much business the clubs have done across the Premier League, and it shows how competitive it is. This season is not going to stop that. Players are going to need to leave, some others to move, and everything is open still." So, I mean, reading between the lines there, um he's still kind of speaking on potentially getting incomings in, but it's always kind of coupled with a caveat of players need to leave. And that kind of echoes what other journalists have said that Arsenal are focusing on outgoings and opportunities and outgoings are going to ultimately be the deciding factor on whether or not Arsenal bring in more players. So, I think we are still active to Arteta's knowledge. We're still active. That's more about Edu and what he can get done in at the end of the window in terms of getting players out the door. We know Torreira looks like he may be on the way out. There's been some complications there with his move to Galatasaray. Pablo Marie looks like he's on the way out. We know Balogun went on loan. Quanco's on loan now. Nuno Tavares is on loan now. Bernd Leno has left the club. So right now it looks like if Torreira were to leave, that it's still Bellerin, Ainsley Maitland-Niles, are the two main ones that are still here that probably need to be moved on. So we'll see what happens, but I would imagine anything that happens beyond now is really going to be based on who we can get out because we have a bloated squad. Not necessarily monetarily. I'm not sure that it has anything to do with needing to raise funds. If that were the case, we're not bringing in anybody because these players are leaving for peanuts. But it's about making sure that you have space in the squad and you don't have players that are not registered. So, yeah, I do think the plan is to continue to bring in players, but that's more up to Edu than Arteta getting comfortable per se. Um, Abdullah, thank you so much for your super chat. Says, "Big up, Jess. We have a better team than Palace, but they have a manager we don't. So winning could go either way because of that." It's difficult. It's a difficult conversation to have around Vieira because he did really well against the top six and then had a difficult time beating the teams in and around him. So to say that he's a better manager to Arteta, I think is somewhat subjective. Um, if you can't beat the teams around you, but you can get your team up for big games, I don't necessarily feel like that means that you're a better fit. But I think Vieira is doing a really good job with Crystal Palace. I don't necessarily feel like it's just all about in this game, like in the games against Spurs and at the Etihad and Anfield, I do think that's where the difference in manager really comes in. But I don't really know if I believe that Vieira is so much superior to Arteta that that's going to be the deciding factor. I think it's more about the team's mentality and being able to handle being in a difficult away ground. Um, that's more my point on that. I do think if you look at what Vieira did last season, it was great, but they finished about where people expected him to. Like, he's not like a Graham Potter at the moment where he's really overperforming maybe with the team that he has. Maybe a striker short of being closer to the top 6. I see a team finishing about where they were supposed to, and he really struggled to get 3 points against the teams that they should have been beating, so that I'm not sure if I really agree with that, but hey, I don't know. Sohan says lineup should be the same as Sevilla game exactly. But yeah, I mean, even like you look at somebody like Eddie Howe, I think he's done a really good job. He also got a lot of backing in January, but ultimately, like the job that he did in a short amount of time was really good. But if you ask me if I would swap out Eddie Howe for Arteta, I wouldn't. Vieira for Arteta, I wouldn't. Graham Potter, I wouldn't. The next manager, if Arteta were to get sacked, would need to be of a world-class level. It doesn't make sense to bring in other managers that are subjectively better, maybe better, kinda. It has to be definitive, and I don't think any of those managers is really definitive at this point. So I don't know, y'all. I don't know how I feel about that, but, you know, we all have our own opinions, right? There's 300 of you guys in here like the video and subscribe to the channel. So Arteta also kind of spoke on the injured players. He said 3 out of the 4 of those players, and Tomiyasu, Smith Rowe, Tierney, and Vieira, are going to be training this afternoon. And if everything goes well, they will be available for selection in the squad. Hopefully, we can start to recover because they've been missing out a lot of minutes and time in preseason, and they are really important players for us. The 3 out of the 4, we know who they are: Tomiyasu, Tierney, and Vieira. Emile Smith Rowe is injured. Again, this is the reason why Emile Smith Rowe is often what people would consider forgotten. It's not because people don't believe in his quality, it's because we don't get to see him enough, and he's injured quite a bit. But we just have to wait and see what happens with him. But in terms of getting players like Tomiyasu, Tierney, and Vieira in the side, I do think is going to be super important because 5 subs is gonna be a big thing. You guys have been kinda talking about that in the chat, that 5 subs could really be a game changer for every single team in the Premier League. Smaller teams may not love it, but a team like Arsenal should be really excited about being able to switch out good players for good players, and we can start building up that competition for spots. Obviously, Tierney and Tomiyasu last season are the 2 players that we would have been relying upon in fullback positions, and now we have 2 players potentially gonna be playing there tomorrow that look like starters as well, Zinchenko and Ben White, so it's gonna be a different feel. I think you're gonna really see players, desperate to keep their spots, which is super important. You also have somebody like William Saliba who looks like he's trying to, um, make a name for himself, really. Like, he looks like, besides Gabriel, he looks the most secure in his position. And the difference between Saliba and Gabriel is there's actually nobody to compete with Gabriel. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. And also Vieira, I think, is somebody who's going really under the radar. He can help us on the right wing, on the left wing, and in Odegaard's position, and maybe even in Xhaka's position. So having him is going to be important as well. Because when people talk about our depth, they're still looking at the Ainsleys, they're looking at the Bellerins kind of hanging around, they're looking at Cedric. Having those 4 players available is really going to change things. So I'm fingers crossed that those guys are on the bench. Not sure if they'll get a run out. I think it'll depend on what the game looks like. When you look at it last season, we had a very difficult time getting minutes to players that were kind of on the fringes, and without any European football, it really kind of hurt us. So if we do have the Crystal Palace game in the bag and we could get 3 goals, you know, maybe you would see minutes for those players, but it's going to be difficult to get it for them if it's a really tight game. So, but having them on the bench could really help. On the expectation around the club, he did talk about what our expectations are, and he said, "It's great that people are excited, but there is a big excitement across the Premier League because a lot of the clubs have done a lot of business, getting stronger and stronger. The competition is really big. We focus on what we can do, what we want to do. We want to be at the top of the table." I think Arsenal are gonna surprise a lot of people. We got a lot of stick, as you guys would say, for this, but there was a period in that season, last season, where we were performing at the same rate in terms of points per game and things like that as the bigger teams. Tottenham were also spoken about in that vein, like, at the end of the season where they really kicked it up a gear, everybody was saying they're performing at the same level as Manchester City and Liverpool. Well, between December and March, which is about the same amount of time that Tottenham were really good last season. We were performing at that level as well. And so the key to that is that you can't just have 4 months within a season where you perform at that level. That consistency needs to start to span across the entire league campaign. And so if Arsenal can regain that level of form, which let's be real, like we were had that level of form between December and March without a striker. Like Lacazette had already kind of fallen off of a cliff, and so we weren't able to really establish that dominance or really put a stamp on that dominance because our buildup was great. Our defensive record was a lot better. We were really dominant in controlling games, but we could not get 2 or 3 goals to put it out of sight. So if we can do that this season, but for a longer period of the season, like instead of for 4 months, we could do it for 6, 7, 8 months, then we're looking at a team that could really surprise some people because I saw a run of form that really made me think, okay, couple of more pieces, some more depth. We're in there. So I do think we're going to be in and around where Spurs and Chelsea are in terms of really fighting for that third and fourth spot. And so those are like kind of the key things that he really kind of talked about. You know, there's not really much else beyond that. He kind of talked about not talking about red cards, so I won't talk about it. Hopefully, we don't get one, in the first game of the season. That would just be totally terrible. Um, Let's see. Dennis says, I really hope Ben White keeps his cool against Zaha. One player I'm sure will be calm is Saliba. So just piggybacking off of what you just said, I think, I kind of pulled out what I think are going to be key matchups for tomorrow's game, and White versus Zaha is definitely one of them. I do think White will start. So because Tomiyasu is not quite ready and we're not going to play Cedric there. We've seen what Cedric is like against Zaha, and I think we all would like to avoid that at all costs. Ben White, I think where his strengths are in possession. When we play the way that we've been playing this preseason in those inverted fullback roles, I think he does a great job there with his distribution and kind of being front footed. But where he struggles is defending out by the touchline. Most of the times when you watch Ben White get beat, it's when he's on the touchline against somebody who's quite quick and he kind of dives in and then he can't catch up and then we're exposed. So I think the combination of White and Saliba is going to have to be really, really on point because Saliba is going to have to cover Ben White and White is going to have to not get um, into any sort of BS with Zaha. Zaha is a flopper, a diver, a drama queen, all those things. And even though I think he's supremely talented and can beat any defender on his day, and probably at some point of his career should have been playing for one of the top clubs, I think at this point, he's somebody that if you make sure that he doesn't get anything, he will just capitulate and be a non-factor for Crystal Palace. He doesn't have a great attitude, and I think the key is not to get wrapped up in the bullshit with Zaha. And so I think for the most part, White tends to keep his wits about him. He doesn't get too, he's not gonna he's not gonna have a Rob Holding moment where he gets a yellow card in the first 5 minutes and then he, quickly gets a red card after that. He's gonna keep his cool in that way. It's just about not getting wrapped up in that. And then also when you're on the touchline with Zaha, not diving in and making sure we have good distances between Saliba and White. So if he does get beat, he's not in on goal, and has he can't have that space in behind Ben White in that half space and there's nobody there until he gets into the box. That is going to be death for Arsenal. So White versus Zaha is going to be a really important matchup. And I also think Martinelli versus Nathaniel Klein is going to be a really good matchup because Nathaniel Klein is not very good. He's somebody that I do think Martinelli should be getting the beating of. I think Mitchell and Saka is going to be an interesting matchup on the right hand side. But I do think when we think about uneven matchups, you think players that, where there's going to be a real uh, difference of quality against each other. I think Martinelli and Klein is going to be an interesting one. I think Martinelli should be eating him up. And those crossfield balls from, White to Martinelli / Jesus, Jesus is going to swap into those positions. And Ramsdale, those those kicks out to Martinelli are gonna be key because that's their weaker side anyway. Anderson and Nathaniel Klein are significantly more weak than Gahey and Mitchell on the other side. So that's the side that we probably should be targeting, and I think if we get overloads there on the left-hand side, that's where we're gonna see our cutbacks come from, and then you just need the likes of Gabriel Jesus and Saka, Odegaard, and Xhaka there for those cutbacks to put them in the back of the net. See what you guys are saying about that. Um, let's see. Don One says Zaha lives off of his performances against Arsenal. I mean, a lot of players that have always wanted to play for Arsenal and our Arsenal fans tend to play really well against us because they want to show that we should have came in and got them. That's just the name of the game. Reinhardt says if White plays well at right back versus Palace, he will play all season as the inverted right back. You know, I do think when a player when a player that's on the pitch is doing well, we tend to forget about the other players, and I do think that Tomiyasu will have a say in all of this when he's fit and ready to go. I think on the ball, Tomiyasu, especially like in deep positions, switching the ball and being able to use both feet is kind of underrated by the fan base. Neither of them are really good in the final third, but Tomiyasu is a better one-on-one defender than Ben White. So I do think Ben White is Arteta's guy, meaning that more times than not, if White is playing well, he'll start. But I think Tomiyasu will have a say in this. I think we have underrated, Tomiyasu based on him having those injury issues. Um, Tomism says, "Just don't do you know that Zaha flapped at Man United?" I do know that he was at Man United. I think that was earlier on in his career, though, when he was quite young. So, when I mean that he could have played for one of the better teams, I mean, like, now when he's hit his prime, not when he was a lot younger. So, I do remember that he was at Manchester United, and he had that whole thing, with Moyes and stuff like that. I do remember that, but I'm talking about, like, he's what, 29 now? Between the ages of, like, 25 and 28, he probably should have been playing for one of the top teams. Um, he just didn't really kick off at United, did he? Tony says, "White isn't on an island, Saliba is behind him, I'm not worried about our back 3." C. Wilder says, "Zaha has an expression like a smacked arse 99% of the time." I love that. Tony says, "I'm surprised Zaha is still at Palace." I think it's about some of the things that I earlier kinda talked about. Um, the attitude, hasn't been great, and we probably were gonna buy him, but we ended up with Pepe instead, which is, like, laughable at this point, but, like, it was just they priced him out of a move at during his prime. Zaha, at the time that we bought Pepe, was, I think, 26 or something like that, and that's the point in time that I'm talking about is 26 to 28 was really, like, that sweet spot for him to go to a bigger club, so yeah. Um Tokello says, "I trust White." C. Wilder says, "Looks like Saliba will be center back and White will be right back. Don't think Tomiyasu is back." Exactly. Don One says, "Zaha will die for a pen." It's just all of that stuff. We know what we're in for, but if you frustrate him for long enough, he will mark himself out of a game. He'll be on the sideline crying like a baby. So we just have to make sure that, we don't get sucked into it. Let's see. So another matchup that I think is gonna be really important is Saliba versus Mateta slash Ayew. I don't know which one will start, but I think Mateta is a very difficult he's difficult opposition because of how tall and gangly he is, but he's also strong and quite fast. So we really struggled with Mateta last season, and everybody was talking about, like, what's that boy's name? They had another striker, Edouard, that they brought in. He couldn't get in the team because Mateta is Vieira's guy. Like, he knows that that guy is hard to deal with. And so I do think that Saliba, this is gonna be a real proper test for him because it's gonna be a big striker. Playing against Chelsea was more like 3, forwards kinda switching positions and things like that. But this is gonna be different. It's gonna be somebody that's gonna wanna place himself right in between our center backs and make things really difficult. So I think Saliba, this is gonna be a good test for him, and, I'm sure he'll do just fine, but it's gonna be different. It's definitely gonna be different. Lynn says Zaha will make a beeline for Saliba as he has never come up against him. So if he goes near him, he will go down. Yeah, I mean, there is a chance that Crystal Palace will see Saliba as maybe the weak link back there because they haven't seen him before. But in terms of their pressing, I think they'll press Gabrielle because on paper, if you just look at it, you would probably think, okay, I'm going to press Gabrielle when Arsenal are in possession. But when we're in possession, we're going to go towards Saliba because we're not quite sure what he is. And most people don't really go at Gabriel because he's kind of somebody that they've established is not a defender you wanna go up against. So, yeah. Tony says, "Just got the 3rd kit right now, right in time for the game." That's awesome, Tony, like, it's gonna be interesting, like, I we're gonna wear the black one, but I can't wait to see what the pink one looks like, on the boys, like, can't wait. Earhart says Saliba is clean. Check his status. Dennis says Saliba is more press resistant than Gabrielle. Exactly, and that's what I'm saying. When when we're in possession, they will probably press Gabrielle. When we're not in possession and they are trying to attack us, they might go towards Saliba because he's an unknown quantity in the Premier League. Whereas I don't think with Gabrielle has been here long enough where they know that they don't want to go near him. So that's where I'm at with that. Roman says, "Even if White plays 10 out of 10, it's still Tommy for me for the season. Arsenal did that with KT saying Nuno is better and should displace KT. Even Zinchenko has to win me over with at least 10, 12 matches." I hear that. I hear that. I do think that the players that aren't playing are being vastly um underrated by the fan base because we haven't seen them in a while in Tierney and Tamiyasu. I do think that they're gonna fight for their positions. I don't think they're just gonna roll over. So and that's what we want. That's exactly what we want. It's just about players that can't stay fit have a hard time going for their positions or trying to fight for them because they're not up, you know? Abdullah says, "Jess, if you give our team to Patrick right now without any additional players, you guarantee top 4, but Arteta won't make top 4 with this team." I mean, I kinda hear what you're saying, but, like, I also don't because Vieira has a CV of being pretty average, as a manager. So, again, if you told me that if you give Conte, this team doesn't make top 4, if you give Tuchel, this team doesn't make top 4, I hear you a lot more. I even would hear you a lot more if you said Ten Hag with this team gets top 4. But Vieira hasn't really shown much, but just the ability to set up his team really well against the top teams in a low block and nick a point and be very, very average against teams in and around him. So I don't really if unless Crystal Palace is not vastly overperforming what they should be. They're a mid-table team and they finished what, 13th or something like that. So call me when he has Crystal Palace, like, in and around the top 6. That's when I'll start paying attention a lot more. I think Eddie Howe is a better manager than Vieira at the moment. I think Graham Potter is a better manager than him at the moment, and I still wouldn't even take those 2. So, it's about the totality of the season, not just what you can do against the big teams. That's kinda where I'm at with that, to be honest. So yeah, it's one of those, I get why people are saying that, anybody would be better than Arteta, but I also think Arteta's improved our team as well, so, there you go. Um Let's see. Peter says it feels really good to start the season with Tommy and KT. That surely means some great promise. Don One says Ben White, Tommy Zinchenko, Tierney is good competition. It really is. So yeah, and I think we have to have similar competition in midfield as well as the attack. And I think an additional central midfielder and attacker does that for us. So there's 340 of you guys in here, which is amazing. Like the video and subscribe to the channel. And Anike, this is a really good point, says, "If our floor is Tierney, Gabriel, Saliba, and Tamiyasu, this is a great season." And that's people I don't think are really taking this into consideration that our floor has risen. And what you want is to bring in new players and your starters from last season to become the bench or to become other options. And that's why if you bring in somebody like a Tielemans, maybe he doesn't start every game against a Xhaka, but your floor is Partey, Xhaka, and Odegaard. If you bring in Tielemans, then maybe it goes up a little bit more. And if you bring in an additional attacker, if your floor is Saka, Martinelli, and Gabriel Jesus, you're still in a good spot, you know? So, yeah, I think we are improving. We just need a little bit more. We need a little bit more. Yep, there's 342 of you guys in here. Like the video and subscribe to the channel. Yup. So let's see. And so equally, like for people that are still kind of saying like, oh, Arteta's crap, by your guys' standards, that Vieira is a better manager than Arteta because he could get points or get whatever against the big teams, then you're basically also saying that Arteta should probably be managing one of the other teams in the top 6 because he beat them in the FA Cup. You know, beating the big teams and still being average around the team with the teams around you and not having a totality of improvement across 38 games or, you know, whatever, it doesn't wash with me. It just doesn't. You know, so Arteta has beaten the big teams before. That doesn't mean that after he won the FA Cup, he should have replaced any of the managers in the top 4. You know, so I think it's flawed logic based on just a narrative that if you don't like Arteta, you don't like him, but let's not start acting like Vieira is, you know, a top 4 manager. He's not. Sorry. You know, so there you go, and I love Vieira, you know, as a player and obviously as a legend. So, let's go ahead and just put our starting lineup up here. Let's not act like, you know, it's gonna be a difficult conversation to have because you know, the team kinda picks itself at the minute, you know, which is kinda nice, but, you know, we want more competition for places as the season goes on. So, this is probably the team that will start. I would be very surprised if anything changed from here. Ramsdale in goal, White, Saliba, Gabriel, Zinchenko, Odegaard, Partey, Xhaka, Martinelli, Jesus, and Bukayo Saka. You know, this is a team that is well equipped, especially because everybody is fit. You know, we don't have walking wounded out there. That should be able to beat Crystal Palace. You know, they should be able to go to a hostile away ground and not fold up like a weak chair. You know, we need the players in midfield to really step up for us and not go missing. You don't have Gallagher in there running around and causing havoc, but I don't think that Crystal Palace's midfield are gonna be anything less than bullies. I think they're gonna be out there really pushing our players down, trying to press them down, and we know Partey and Odegaard are quite press resistant in some regard, but Xhaka is maybe not so much, you know, but that hasn't really been an issue, unless Partey is not there. Then you have, you know, your back line. I do think the pressing trigger in our back line is going to be Gabriel, so he needs to be on his game. I do believe that during kind of parts of preseason, you could see a little bit of shakiness on the ball, like his first touch wasn't as good as the other 3. So he really needs to be on point. He cannot have one of those early moments where the pass is too short or, you know, he has a bad first touch in possession. He really needs to be on point because I do think he's going to be the player that they try to converge upon. And defensively, our left-hand side is not as good as our right-hand side. So Zinchenko, if he's out of position and, you know, Gabriel has a bad touch, we could be in trouble. So those 2 really need to be on point, and Gabriel needs to make sure that he doesn't get caught out early with their press because we know they're gonna press us hard. And then in terms of, like, that front line, it's just about if you get chances, put them away. Early chances, you know, when we start off fast, because I think we will, there is no, you know, missing sitters and stuff like that. You have got to put the ball in the back of the net. It's you know, Gabriel Jesus, he has to be the difference in this game. I expect him to score in this game, make a difference, and be that guy. Don't have a Lacazette, you know, Casper moment up there where you're like, okay, we're definitely playing with 10 men. Make sure you make it a difficult afternoon for those center backs. And I think we should win the game. Also, looking at Ramsdale really closely. I think at the back end of last season, he was really shaky. And then now in preseason, he looks a lot more like himself. He needs to make sure that he doesn't have any errors, you know, start off the season well. So that's going to be our starting 11 most likely. And I think that starting 11 is more than good enough to get the 3 points against Crystal Palace. So let's go ahead and do our predictions now. What do you guys think? Usually the chat is pretty confident. but I wanna see how confident you guys actually are. So let's get in the chat and let me know what you guys think the score of this game is going to be. Predictions, predictions. Mm, 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 mm. Predictions, predictions. Let's see. All right. Tony says 2-1 to the Arsenal. Magzino says 3-1 to Arsenal. Narit says 2-0 Palace. Dennis says 2-0 to the Arsenal. Ishmael says 3-2 to who? That's my question. Um, Sports Gamer Boy says hopefully 2-1 Arsenal. Um, I don't want to kill your name. Aswinifalua says 3-0. Ishmael says Arsenal, of course. Rashid says 3-0 Arsenal. Peter says 2-1 to the Arsenal. Um, Don One says F it 4-0. Einhart says 4-1 to the Arsenal. Roman says Crystal Palace 1, Arsenal 3. Lynn says 3-1. Is that to the Arsenal or to Crystal Palace? Um, one DJ says 2-1 to the Arsenal. Let's see. Anike says ignoring nerves 1-3 to the Arsenal. Clean sheet to the Arsenal. Tony says 2-0. Let's see. Blaze says Arsenal will win 2-1, but it will be difficult. Javier says being realistic 1-1. Crystal Palace is a solid team with a good manager. If we haven't improved beyond beating good, solid teams with good managers, then we haven't done enough. At this point, Arsenal, I mean, we won 21 games last season, and we had moments where, we were really poor and inconsistent on the bookends of the season. So my thing is the team that I looked at and the team that I saw in preseason has got to be better than Crystal Palace has a solid team with a good manager. That's Brighton, that's that's Brentford, those types of teams all have solid teams and a good manager. So we should still beat them. Aston Villa, I just think we're beyond that now. If we can't beat Crystal Palace because it's away from home and they have a decent team with some, difficult players to play against and they have a manager that knows how to set up a team well, we haven't improved enough, to be a top 3/top 4 team. These are the types of teams you need to beat. You need to be able to not give up that first nervy goal. You have to be able to finish your first 1 or 2 chances and put it beyond reach of these teams. We need to be beating these teams, not easily, but we need to be confident that we can beat them. I get Crystal Palace has been our bogey team, but we need to get beyond this. I don't believe that good manager, solid team should be something that we don't feel like we should be beating. But I understand you want to be realistic. And last season, a solid team with a good manager was kind of like could hurt us. But I saw enough of a consistent and improved Arsenal during our best period of the season where a good manager and a solid team was not good enough to beat us. Between December and March. And the team that I saw in preseason is a better version than that. So we should be beating Crystal Palace full stop. We've had too good of a preseason, really, to be looking at and like not in terms of results, but the team that we're seeing in the way that we're playing. If they had an inconsistent preseason and we had the best preseason we could possibly have, we have a better team, we should be beating them, you know? Peter says we can't afford the 3 losses in a row this season. If we cannot beat Palace, we have not made serious progress. That's kinda where I'm at right now. We gotta be winning. iGamer says Arsenal is winning this match. Lynn says Wolves had a good manager and they were on fire, but we beat them. Exactly, like, we need to be beyond that because the top 4 teams don't lose to solid teams with a good manager, you know? They just don't, so I'm seeing a lot of wins. Chris Rock. Is it the real Chris Rock? How's your face feel? No, I'm joking. Habib says, 3-0 to the Arsenal. Tracksmith says 2-0 to the Arsenal. So yeah, I think we're gonna win 3-1. I think we'll go up 2-0, give up a goal, and then come back and get one more. I back Gabriel Jesus to score. I think Saka will score. And maybe we'll score off of a set piece or something like that, but I think we'll win the game. I don't think it'll be comfortable per se, but I do think that it's gonna be a hard-fought game, but they're gonna be looking at an Arsenal that's not the same one that they beat 3-0 or drew last season. So, let's go ahead and leave it there. There's 320 of you guys in here. Make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. I really enjoyed. Again, this is the most consistent part of my day that feels the most like normal. And so I enjoy having these chats with you guys. Again, tomorrow I'll be on the football terrace for the match reaction, so make sure you tune in for that. And I'll also upload like a match review. So it's not going to be as it was last season where I was doing like the live right after the game. I'll be on the football terrace doing that with them. So make sure you tune in there. But also, you'll get a match review, like a short 10-minute video where I just kind of go over my key points. And then obviously, we do a longer download, later on in the week. So make sure you guys are tuned in for that. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and yeah, up the Arsenal.